Hello, everybody. It's Larry Kotlikoff with Economics Matters, the podcast. I'm here with one of my favorite personal finance journalists, longtime friend, Mary Beth Franklin. Let me tell you about Mary Beth. She's got a very illustrious career in journalism as a personal finance journalist. For more than 40 years, she's been based in DC, writing about money. And she's written about big policy issues such as the federal budget, and the deficit and tax legislation, but also consumer-focused personal finance advice, articles, for example, on how to maximize Social Security benefits. This is how we interacted a bunch. We were talking about different uh, issues in this very complex system, about how to minimize your taxes, how to get into Medicare and not face any penalties for applying too late, and understanding the Medicare Part B and Part D and Medicare Advantage, the different programs. And she's got the great ability to take complicated topics and make them understandable and clear cut, as you'll see, as you'll hear. And she has lots of examples in all of her writings. She's a Capitol Hill writer, reporter for the United Press International during the 80s. And then she she moved from there to write for Kiplinger's Personal Finance magazine for 13 years as the tax and retirement editor. So she was both the editor and writer. And she worked then for Investment News as a contributing editor. And she also at Kiplinger's edited the annual retirement planning guide, a monthly retirement report newsletter. So uh, she also then got a CFP designation, which is the Certified Financial Planner designation. So she's a CFP. She's able to give people personal financial advice. And then she's doing lots of public speaking over the years, and continues to do that. She worked for Investment News starting in 2012, and in just, I guess, in the most recent years, she's stopped formally being associated with a publishing outfit, but she's still continuing to do public speaking. And she's starting a new phase of her career, and we're not going to call it retirement because Mary Beth Franklin and the word retirement do not go together. So, Mary Beth, great to have you with me. Let me start out by, first of all, saying thank you so much for joining us. And it'd be great if you could kind of start from where you were born and how your career evolved from uh, into this area. How did you get interested in it, and why did it take off?
Well, first of all, Larry, thank you so much for inviting me to be a guest on your podcast. I know you've had an illustrious list of guests, and I feel honored to be on that list. I grew up in the Philadelphia area. I always like to joke I am a Franklin from Philadelphia, but I'm not really sure how far that ancestry goes back.
Yeah.
It's great for restaurant reservations when I'm in town, though, a Franklin from Philadelphia. I ended up going to college at American University in Washington, D.C. I knew from the time I was about 7 years old, I wanted to be a writer. And over the years, the form I thought that would take is I wanted to be a television anchor. That was my goal. And American University had a terrific broadcast journalism program back there. And the head of our department was a guy named Ed Bliss, who happened to be Walter Cronkite's editor at CBS. And before that, he had worked with Edward R. Murrow. So really, the credentials didn't get any better than that. But as it turned out, when you graduate from college, the doors don't necessarily open to a network anchor job. The job that did open was a small wire service in Washington, D.C. that covered commodities, things like gold, silver, cotton, wheat, soybeans, of which I knew nothing about, but did learn on the job. And it was a very exciting time. When I started working in Washington, and this is about 1976, Think of it this way. The Credit Card Act of 1974 had just been passed, allowing women to have credit cards in their name for the first time. Women were initially not members of the National Press Club. We had to sit in the balcony to cover main events. I was fortunate that my first bureau chief became one of the first female executives at the National Press Club. So I was part of the press club from the beginning.
So what year we're talking again? Did you say?
1976, I started working in Washington.
So women were not allowed to have credit cards until when?
1974, in their own name. You had to have it either in your husband or your father's name before 1974.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I had no
So,
idea that I never heard that story. That's just amazing. I mean, uh, well, shocking. Go ahead.
and the fact that I was coming to work in Washington just as all these trailblazer women journalists were breaking barriers for the rest of us. I worked with Helen Thomas when I was at United Press International. I was friends with Cokie Roberts when she was at NPR. Fabulous role models for me. I went from this small wire service to a brief stint working on the President's Commission on 3 Mile Island. And what was interesting there, as a member of the public information team, is in the old days, if you left journalism for a government job, you could never go back. But again, things were just changing. So this is 1979, 1980. And suddenly, coming from a government job, I was getting interviews at major news organizations that I couldn't get in the past. I was getting interviews with the Wall Street Journal and United Press International and what was in the Washington Star. I ended up working with UPI as a Capitol Hill reporter for about 10 years. I covered Social Security reform in the 80s, tax reform in the 80s, budget reform. So it was a great basis for me to learn about the big numbers, the macroeconomic numbers of money. And from there, I spent 10 years having a syndicated newspaper column that was in about 200 newspapers around the country, writing for and about older people, things like Medicare, Social Security, long-term care insurance, long-term care planning. And that was great background for me when a job opened up at Kiplinger's Personal Finance magazine in Washington, D.C., and spent another 13 years there, again, writing about money, but this in from the consumer angle. So I took all that information I learned on the Hill and all that information I learned about answering people's questions with the syndicated column to suddenly being a writer and editor at a national personal finance magazine. And that's where I stumbled on my passion of Social Security claiming strategies. It was back in 2008. And my brothers and sisters are much older than I am. My oldest brother is 18 years older than I am.
Well, okay.
And they were starting to reach Social Security age and were claiming Social Security benefits at age 62 and continuing to work and then complaining to me that they were losing these benefits. And I said, well, that doesn't make much sense. Let me look into it. And I found a great guy at the Social Security Administration in Baltimore who taught me everything of
Who was
how to
that?
maximize Social Security. This was 2008.
Do you remember his name? Is that,
He unfortunately passed away a few years later.
is
I'd
it,
have to
okay.
look at my notes. I remember
Yeah.
his name was Mark, but he taught me everything of how people could maximize their benefits, particularly married couples and eligible divorced spouses, because there was a piece of legislation in 2000, the Citizens Right to Work Act, that created these claiming strategies that would allow, for example, a husband to file for his Social Security benefits for the purpose of triggering a spousal benefit for his wife and then suspending his own benefits so it could keep growing. Now, over the years, a lot of these creative claiming strategies have been shut down. So there's not as many ways to maximize lifetime benefits, except in the case of people who are survivors. If you have your own retirement benefit and you are also entitled to a survivor benefit because your spouse or ex-spouse has died, these are two separate benefits, and people may be able to claim one type of benefit first and switch to another benefit later to maximize their lifetime benefits.
Right. So these different transitions from working on commodities or going to college, having a great, well-connected person, but he couldn't actually make very good. He couldn't make the connection that you really wanted, so you tried something else. But then in each of these steps, where you're switching from with the United Press International to working for Kiplinger's, which is a very famous, for those who don't necessarily know it or might be younger, uh, extremely well-respected uh, journal or publication about investing and personal finance. Uh, and then you move into investment news, which is similar. So these different moves, are they connected to connections? Are they connected to meeting the right person at the right time? Or because it's not necessarily the case that somebody at Kiplinger's would have heard about your work in commodities, right?
Right.
Commodity.
It was never a matter of connections as much as subject matter, that I went from writing about commodities, where I learned to write about technical things in
Mhm.
an easy to understand manner. I went to the President's Commission because, being from Pennsylvania, I was fascinated that, wow, there was a nuclear accident in my home state. I want to get involved in this. And then that opened a door that I could go to Capitol Hill and learn in-depth information about federal tax policy and budgets and Social Security reform. Some of it was personal. By the time I left United Press International, I had two young children. Being a Capitol Hill reporter and covering the Senate, whether it went till midnight or 2 a.m., was not real conducive to having a family. In fact, I remember the day that I got home at 5 a.m. after covering a Senate debate. I had an infant that woke up at 6, a dog that threw up at 7, a toddler that woke up at 8, and I said, I'm done. I have to figure something else out. And that's when I was able to um, be a freelancer for the first time, writing this syndicated column. And at the same time, I also wrote for a bunch of magazines, all from my basement office. And this was in the days before we really had internet searches. I would have to go to the library to research stories. I remember typing my stories, downloading them on a floppy disk, and mailing them to the New York Times that syndicated my column. This was truly in the dark ages. But each time I changed jobs, it was basically because of a lifestyle issue. Either I wanted to pursue a topic more in depth that another publication would allow me to do, or it was a family issue. I needed to be home for my kids a little more. But each time I would make a list of what did I like about my current job and what did I hate about my current job, and how could I find a job where I would do the things I like more. So each time I would say that changing jobs was the scariest thing I ever did, and always turned out to be the best decision. It was
When you say
certainly
yeah, when you say open doors or doors opened, did you kind of open the doors yourself? I mean, it sounds like when you decided to become a kind of just start your own syndicated column, did you have to start calling people and say, would you like this column? I mean, it
part of
sounds,
it was uh, being in the right place at the right time. At that point, and again, that was probably about 1989, 1990, uh, the there was a new wire service called uh, Maturity News Service. I think it was originally called Third Age Media. And it was seed money from AARP with no editorial control from them. And it was syndicated through the New York Times. And I had a chance to write a few trial columns for them. And they liked what I wrote about, and they offered me a weekly column. And that gave me enough of a financial base that I could quit my job with UPI, work from home, and then build a freelancing career on top of that. At that point, I had the syndicated column. I also wrote about senior health issues for the Washington Post. I wrote about interesting women for the Chicago Tribune. So I would cobble together these various publications. And my rule was always research once, sell 3 times. If I could find things about old sick women, I could sell them to 3 different publications.
But you had to know people to call up and say, could you take a look at this column? Do you want it?
Yes,
And
yes.
yeah. Now, I mean, that's to me, that's connections, but also initiative. I mean, it's not, it's a combination of being at the right place at the right time, but also kind of opening the door for yourself in some ways.
And I think that's because of my background in journalism. Now, in the old days, we did so much by phone. You were picking up a phone, calling a source, cold calling, introducing yourself, asking questions. So that sort of telephone relationship was just natural for me to call up a bureau chief. Hi, do you have any jobs? Here's my background. I want to come to a new publication. So part personality and part professional skills allowed me to keep leapfrogging to the next job. But I tended to spend at least a decade every place I landed. We would joke, my husband, who was also originally a journalist, the first thing he would do when he got a new job was update his resume and look for another job. I didn't have that modus operandi. I liked to grow in the job I had, and often to the point that I outgrew it and needed to do something new.
Yeah, I mean, I part of what I try and do with this podcast is get younger people, hopefully, who are watching or listening, to figure out how to move ahead in their careers. And I get the sense that from talking to so many people that it's kind of partly serendipity, but partly you're making your own magic, your own uh, luck, so to speak. You have to be aggressive and be looking out. I've seen some really talented people just sit in the same office doing the same job that is way below their skill level just because they're not sufficiently aggressive, put it that way. Uh, they're too nervous or shy or something. So you need to kind of overcome that anxiety that you're going to get turned down. You are going to get turned down. You just have to wait till you don't get turned down, and you're going to do things that are not the right option, and you're going to hate the job, and then you bump into somebody over lunch who suggests trying this, and then that turns out. So we're we're having a minor on I think this week on the podcast who uh, got into mining because he was a geologist, and then he was working trying to find precious metals like gold, and nothing was panning out to be penny. And then he saw some formation of sand in the Utah desert, and it had this special feature that it didn't produce dust. And he figured, wow, this might be perfect for sandboxes. So in the end, he makes an entire career in company, small company, not super wealthy or anything, just by mining with a truck and a couple people, and he's shoveling and shipping huge, uh, heavy, heavy sacks of sand to different school systems around the country, and that was just completely accidental. That this happened. So keeping your eyes open. But tell me, let's talk uh, about personal finance. About we have this is the peak retirement year. We have the most people retiring. I think it's 4 million this year of any year ever. These are all baby boomers, people in our generation, and there's pretty good evidence that they've screwed it up as a group. That we've screwed it up. That uh, we've not saved enough. We've invested poorly. We've paid too much commission to advisors. We've relied on our employer. We on our employer's 401k uh, account, retirement account policy. Some of us didn't have, a lot of us didn't have any retirement account to contribute to, let alone get contributions from our employer. If you look at the poorest baby boomers, only 10% had ever had access or have actually a retirement account. A lot of them didn't participate. A lot of them, well, a lot of people at all levels don't participate or don't participate enough. They don't contribute enough. And then when they do participate, they might sell at the bottom and buy at the top and lose money that way or pay a high commission, depending on what, the idea that our basic retirement system, apart from Social Security, should be in the hands of our employers who are not in any way expert or trained to tell us, hey, this is the set of investments that you're allowed to contribute to, and here's the fees that you have to pay. I mean, this is just completely a complete, I would say, conspiracy uh, of Congress together with Wall Street to enrich each other. Because if you look at, for example, the way that this thing was set up, I'm sure it was set up by for example, the House Committee on Financial Services subcommittee, and their main contributors are all the major banks and mutual fund companies. Even, through time today, you could look that up right online, right at this minute. So we're seeing lots of people who have left it to the employer and Social Security and retired too early, thinking they were going to die on time and are going to die far too late. And then we also have people that didn't have employers to, quote, take care of them and took Social Security too early, as almost everybody's doing, and are in really terrible shape. So, I mean, this is my sense, but what is your sense of do we have a retirement crisis? We know that Social Security is supposed to run out of money. So there's that crisis, but that's more of a government crisis, funding crisis. But assuming Social Security doesn't stop paying benefits as projected, I still think there's a huge problem.
Well, first of all, the baby boom generation, those people born from 1946 through 1964, more than 76 million people, there is no one right answer of how are baby boomers going to retire. There's a huge income disparity during their working years and will continue to have a huge income disparity in retirement. Part of it, the challenge, I think, is the baby boomers were a great guinea pig generation. When they started working, some of them were lucky enough to work for employers that still had traditional pension plans. Now, at no point did everybody have access to a pension. We think back to the golden years of pensions, maybe late 70s, early 80s. Even at that point, I think maximum you had maybe 30% of people had a pension. And the key was people may have gone to work for an employer that had a pension, but didn't stay long enough with that employer to actually get a pension.
To be vested, right.
Right. Vesting rules were much longer. It was built for a workforce that went to work for one company, one blue chip company, and stayed there the entire career and got their gold watch and got their pension. Gee, that's a great story. But that truly never applied to everyone. Then in around 1980, we had the IRAs come in, we had the 401ks, and frankly, pensions were very expensive for employers to maintain when they faced global competition. If you were IBM and you were the big kid on the block, you were fine. But suddenly you have Nokia and Japanese companies who don't have the cost of the healthcare system you're providing, the pension system you're providing. So it really was globalization that was the real threat to the American pension system, that employers were looking for cheaper ways to offer benefits. And that's when the 401k came in. At that point, in the very beginning, employers could set up these plans that employees could contribute to. But in the beginning, the employers didn't know what to do with it. The employees didn't know what to do with it. The theory was, oh, don't tell them how to invest their money because if they screw it up, they might sue us. Fast forward another 40 years, and it was, you have to tell them how to invest their money because if you don't, they're going to sue us. So the baby boomers were caught in the middle of maybe they had a pension to start with, and in my case, had a pension that was frozen a few years into my worked with Kiplinger. It wasn't going to be worth all that much. I got a chunk of money, not a whole lot. 401ks replaced that. I contributed to it. I was lucky. I had an employer that matched it. Many people didn't have an employer match. Many people didn't have that 401k in the first place. In fact, to this day, about half of workers do not have access to a workplace savings plan. And yes, you could say, well, you've got an IRA option, but that takes effort. People have to say, I'm going to set up my IRA. I'm going to fund my IRA. I can't put as much in an IRA as I can in a 401k. So it's very patchwork. It takes people who are determined and forward thinkers and planners. Yes, they can make the current retirement system work for them. But people who are left to their own devices, unless they have to have a very benevolent employer that gives them a good retirement plan, gives them direction of how to fund it, gives them a match, it's going to be tough in retirement. So I live in the Washington, D.C. area where we have a lot of people that retire from the federal government. These people still have pensions. And I have always seen anecdotally, the people who are happiest in retirement tend to be retired government workers, retired teachers, people who have a pension and who often have health benefits to go with it. They're not the wealthiest retirees, but they're the most satisfied retirees because that constant concern of how much money comes in each month in retirement is taken care of by their pension and in some cases Social Security. And their biggest concern about expense, healthcare costs in retirement, a big chunk of that is covered by their retiree health benefits.
Yeah,
Not everybody has access to these benefits.
right. Yeah. So there's the access, and then the pensions that people do have are generally not indexed, or certainly not fully indexed in general for inflation. So just in the last three years or so, people lost about a fifth of their purchasing power for the rest of their lives because we've had 20% or so cumulative inflation. Prices have gone up, but the pensions haven't. If you had no indexation, no.
And that brings us to Social Security. Why I try to argue to some people, not everyone, the value of delaying their Social Security benefit up until age 70 when it's worth the maximum amount. Because if you start with the biggest benefit possible and Social Security is indexed to inflation, each year that percentage increase, that cost of living adjustment, is applied to a bigger base. So in terms of the increase you're getting each year, it's bigger in a dollar amount.
Right. And I want to go back to, this talk, this discussion of the big corporations moving from defined benefit standard pension plans to defined contribution 401k type plans, Roth type plans. You mentioned IBM in this. IBM, to my knowledge, I was the first company to lead the way of taking their defined benefit plan and turning it and freezing it in place and replacing it with a 401k. And I wrote a column for the Boston Globe called The Great Pension Swindle, because you had workers at IBM who were staying, came to work for IBM, and they took presumably a lower wage, knowing that they would stay with the company for a long time. And every year they accrue more and more pensions, especially into their 50s, because in your 50s, the way the formulas worked, you really could accrue a lot. The accrual went up dramatically as you're getting into your 50s because of the length of service was in the formula and the increment to waiting. So how did this all start? It started with the executives of IBM and maybe, older employees on some committee who said, let's set up a formula for a pension where we benefit ourselves because we're close to retirement. So let's set up a formula that credits service dramatically because we've had a lot of service. Okay. And then, but anyway, so they have this thing set up, and then IBM says from 1 minute to the next, hey, the system's frozen. Sorry if you came here to work and we paid you less than you could earn somewhere else because of our pension. Too bad. Now you're in a 401k, and now we'll contribute something, you'll contribute, and we're going to set this up with one of these mutual fund companies that contributes to your congressman, by the way, who's on this committee, and that's the kickback, and we'll have to pay a fee. Uh, so have to take some of your money to cover the fee, or when you invest in one of their mutual funds, you'll have to pay a fee. And of course, the fees have come down through time uh, with with Vanguard and John Bogle pushing index funds so that they're now quite low. But this was to me part and parcel of a general kind of game plan of older generations through different mechanisms. Basically, I use this very strong term, screwing younger people, saying we're going to expropriate we're out for ourselves, even if it's our kids we're hurting. We're not directly hurting our kids, so uh, we're hurting somebody else's kids. We're going to get everything we can. We know Social Security is kind of financed on a Ponzi scheme basis, pay as you go, take from the young, give to the old, tell the young, hey, you'll be able to take from your kids, and we know that that's in terrible long-term shape, that's 65 trillion in the red, according to the Social Security's own trustees report, table 6F1. And then we got in the unions, they've set up the same kind of system, and their pension funds, which haven't been converted, are also in the red. Not sustainable because the older union members set things up for themselves. And we also had corporate America engage in this behavior. To me, and then of course the whole fiscal system has been shifted towards reducing the taxation of older people by having tax cuts, running deficits, and then also changing the structure of taxing more labor income, less asset income, by treating capital gains and dividends better. So do you see this as kind of a subtle conspiracy of older people to expropriate younger people? I've been involved in developing on the academic side things with co-authors called generational accounting and fiscal gap accounting to really look at the picture that we're leaving our kids. And to me, it's one of expropriation. Hey, and it's just like a massive Ponzi scheme everywhere you look. We're going to get ours, and you'll have your chance to give us. And when your kids are around, and too bad if you're having fewer kids, but that's your problem. You can take from them, and then they can take from the next generation. That's Charles Ponzi. That's Bernie Madoff. That's America.
Well,
That's
I
what
wouldn't call Social Security a conspiracy theory, and I know a lot of people like you and others do call it a Ponzi
I'm a big
scheme.
fan. Let me say I'm a big fan of what the social insurance. I'm not a big fan of the way it's been financed, and I'm terribly concerned about the way it's been clawing back benefits from people, the scams that it's been running. I mean, you've heard about the clawback scandals. Thank God we now have a decent person, Commissioner O'Malley, trying to address this. But I love Social Security's basic, uh, purpose and goals. We need to have government in here because what we see is that private individuals are not being able to pull this off. You've said that, and we also see this.
It's true.
Yeah,
Social Security is a social insurance program. The idea
yeah,
is you are taxed based on your wages, as is your employer,
yeah.
and those taxes are earmarked for Social Security benefits. It does not go into a private little trust fund with your name on it for when you retire. Today's workers' taxes are paying the benefits of today's retirees. Now,
Right.
I want to go back to Social Security reform in 1983, which was the last time Social Security was really in danger of not
Right.
being able to pay all the promised benefits. Let's also remember a system that's more than 85 years old, it's never missed paying a check. So people do depend on this. But back then in 1983, they made some changes, raising the FICA taxes, changing the amount of wages subject to those taxes, taxing benefits for the first time. But they said as long as 90% of US wages were being taxed for FICA purposes, Social Security would never run out of money. The problem is there is such an income imbalance that so many people currently make more than the maximum taxable wage base, which this year is about $168,000. You're paying your FICA tax up to that amount. And if you make more than that, you are not paying FICA taxes on the excess to contribute to Social Security. Pay a little piece that funds Medicare, but once you top out, you're not paying more into Social Security. That means because so many people are making so much more than $168,000 and change a year, that only about 83% of US wages are now being taxed for FICA purposes.
Versus what was it in 83? Do you recall?
90%. And they said as long as 90% was being taxed, Social Security would never run out of money.
Let me just restate that in kind of more nerdy academic terms, that the wage distribution, the inequality in wages, we've seen a major increase in the inequality in wages. So much higher share, and you're suggesting 5 to 8% or so of the wages today are above the ceiling. The ceiling's kept up with average wage growth, but because certain people that are high skilled in the particular areas that are valued, might be tech today, and something else yesterday, but over time, in the last 20, 30, 40 years, inequality in wages has grown. There's it's very easy to show with the data that because the government collects data every year on these wages. So a bigger share of the wages are above the ceiling. So part of the expropriation here, if the fact that the ceiling has not been increased to keep the same share of wages subject to Social Security taxes, is partly a reflection of the rich trying to protect themselves. It's just like the old are trying to protect themselves and get as much as they can from the young, and the rich are trying to get as much as they can from everybody else and pay as little as possible. Now, this is why
to give you some context, if 90% of US wages were being taxed for FICA purposes, that current taxable wage ceiling, instead of being about $168,000, would be about $250,000.
Right.
That how would be subject to FICA taxes. Now, the biggest complaint that has always been about raising this taxable wage base comes from small businesses who say, hey, we're the employer, we have to pay the other half of that tax. Employee pays 6.42%, and so does the employer. My response to those small businesses is, really, how many employees do you have making more than $168,000 that would be paying this? Unless you're a law practice or a medical practice, you probably don't have employees making that kind of money. So the one issue is, what would happen if more wages were being subject to the FICA tax that is earmarked to pay actual Social Security benefits?
That would help, but what? Yeah, I haven't seen the latest kind of estimates from Social Security actuaries like Steve Goss, but do you have a sense of, if we got the ceiling back up to the same share of wages, 90% of wages that it was back then? Do you have a sense of how much of the 65.9 trillion would go away?
It would solve about half the problem. You can't just do it on taxes alone.
It would solve the true infinite horizon problem, or just the next 75-year problem?
The 75-year problem, which is based on total payroll and GNP. So you have to do other things. The problem, and what does it come from? Do you gradually raise the full retirement age, currently 67 for anybody born 1960 or later? What happens if you gradually raise it to 70? Now, a lot of people hate this idea, particularly Democrats. The House Republicans, the study committee has suggested raising the full retirement age. But, you're talking for today's 2-year-olds. They're going to live to 120. The program is more than 85 years old, but the full retirement age has only increased by 2 years over those 85 plus years, from the original full retirement age of 65 to what is now 67. If the thing that they did back in the 1980s Social Security reforms that was so effective was they gave a long lead time. That legislation was 40 years ago, and yet the final piece, raising the full retirement age, really isn't fully implemented until 2027. When
So they
the
gave a
first wave,
40-year horizon for raising the retirement age, but even if we could, let's say, tax the right share of wages for Social Security as we did, which, if we're going to keep this current system, which I think personally I would reform dramatically, but fundamentally I would freeze it actually and start something that is generationally equitable and intra-generationally equitable. But anyway, apart from that, the slow increase in retirement age means that in present value, you don't get much revenue on balance, net revenue, net of the extra, it doesn't produce that much enough money to matter to that $65.9 trillion red ink. So we have to do other things if we're going to maintain the current system, which is can make it more progressive, the benefits more progressive. Some people wanted to under-index the benefits of older people. I think that's a terrible idea of high income beneficiaries, or let's say people receiving high benefits relative to low benefits. There's proposals for partially indexing their benefits. I think that's a terrible system. I think everything should be indexed for inflation. We shouldn't be subjecting people to, when they're 80, all of a sudden, whether they're upper middle class or lower, incomes, we shouldn't be randomly subjecting them to having their real incomes decline because. So do you have any pet schemes for saving Social Security that would actually bring in real money right away?
well, there has been some talk. Again, going back to 1983, one of the brilliant things they did was looking ahead 20, 30 years, saying, hey, we're going to have this huge baby boomer generation starting to retire around 2010. Let's collect more FICA tax revenue than we need and stockpile it in what we think of as the trust fund reserves. And for approximately 30 years, those trust funds kept growing and growing to about $3 trillion. Around 2010, two things happened. We're at the end of the great financial crisis. A lot of people lost their jobs. People who lose their jobs don't pay FICA taxes, and neither do their employers. And it was the first wave of baby boomers starting to retire around 2010. So for the first time, there was not enough revenue coming from FICA taxes alone to pay promised benefits. And for the first time around 2010, we then had to start tapping the interest that was being earned on the trust fund. That's another source of income for Social Security benefits. That worked till about 2021. We're in the middle of the COVID pandemic. We had more baby boomers retiring, often for health reasons or because they lost their job. So FICA taxes and the interest on the trust funds alone were not sufficient to pay benefits. That was the first time in 2021 we had to actually start drawing down the principal of those trust funds. And that's the path we are going to be on for about the next 10 years. And if Congress does nothing between now and approximately 2034, when those trust fund reserves are expected to be depleted, there would be enough money from FICA taxes alone to pay about 80% of promised benefits. That means if the trust funds are exhausted, Social Security isn't going bankrupt. There would be enough money from ongoing FICA tax revenues to pay the majority of promised benefits, but not all of them. Now, that's a political crisis right there. And I don't really foresee that happening because I don't see Congress saying to what would then be about 70 million beneficiaries, we're going to cut your benefits by 20%. They're not going to do it. They know older voters vote in higher percentages than anybody else. But I think they're going to have to find other solutions this time around, because the longer term phase-in solutions, like let's gradually raise the full retirement age over a 40-year period.
Just
Let's
not enough money.
gradually, it's
Yeah.
not going to be enough. They're going to need money up front. So one of the things you hear, the senator from Louisiana, I can't remember his name right now,
Is that
is talk.
Kennedy? Is that Kennedy?
No, it's somebody else. I'll look up his name. The idea that in the past, these trust fund dollars have been invested in specially issued government bonds that pay about 2%. And this was going over the last 30 years when the stock market was make 10%, 20%, 30%. So one of the arguments is, can't money be invested that would get a higher return? Another is, does there need to be at least a generationally temporary transfer of some general funds to get us over this demographic hump for maybe the next 25 years, and money that would earn a higher return and then perhaps return to a just earmark system? My concern is there's going to have to be some infusion of revenue beyond just the FICA earmark taxes.
I think
And
they're going to raise other taxes. But my problem with the entire fiscal operation, I've talked about, we know that there's this generational policy problem that's just immense, and generational inequality, intragenerational inequality. But my problem of doing too little, too late, my concern with doing too little, too late is exemplified by this 83 commission that we had, the Greenspan Commission, that was supposedly going to fix the system for good. At least that's what they intended when they sat down. But when they ended up, with their reforms, there was a whole package of them, and you've enunciated a bunch of them. It really wasn't, they knew back then that we were going to, 75 years later, because they were only looking at 75 years, that they had operated on only half the cancer, and that 75 years later, the cancer would be bigger. And that's actually, today it's not 75 years, but it's, I guess, about 50 years from the Greenspan Commission right now, 51 years. Our cancer on this system is twice as big. The tumor is twice as big as it was then, as measured by what the trustees say is the permanent FICA tax percentage point increase needed to pay for Social Security on benefits that are committed on an ongoing basis. So what we need today is about a 4.5 percentage point hike in the FICA tax rate, which is now 12.4, as you said. So getting it pretty close to 17%, in order to pay for benefits on an ongoing basis. Back then, it was about a 2 percentage point increase. And they tried they didn't exactly do that. They did some other things that didn't amount to a 2 percentage point increase. So this is my concern. We're going to yet again do too little, too late.
And part of the problem is demographics, that Americans are having fewer babies. There are fewer workers in the workforce to support a very large retiree population. So they're dealing with the real economics of workforce, changing nature of work, demographics, immigration issues. But then the hard part comes down to politics. If our Congress, which has so divided and has accomplished so little in the last few years, to deal with such a controversial and important issue like Social Security reform, I'm not real optimistic. How do they fix this? Because it requires bipartisan cooperation, and it definitely requires leadership from the White House, because on their own, what politician wants to go to their constituents and say, hey, I'm going to raise your Social Security taxes and or cut your benefits, vote for me. They don't want to do it. So they're going to wait till the last minute, like they did the last time, and force some sort of solution through. I
So,
think they will come up with a solution, but I think it will be at the last minute, like it was in 1983.
so you have kids, and how would you tell somebody who's in their 30s, what would you tell them to do? I mean, they can't count on their employer, they can't count on Social Security, as we've been discussing. Uh, they can't count on their parents because their parents aren't, you know, haven't saved enough, so most of them are not going to inherit uh, to bail them out. So and then there's the issue of self-discipline. And we have a lot of kids who are trying to make a killing on Bitcoin or things like this. Uh, how do you get people to kind of, you've been at this for a long time. How do you talk to younger people and get them to basically save for themselves and in a responsible way? Because, I mean, they should be afraid of what's coming.
Well,
We're
again,
coming
it
after
is
them, we're really going to come after them uh, in terms of, go ahead.
the millennials are no more homogeneous than the baby boomers are. Some are doing fabulously well. Some are struggling, particularly those who have student loan debt. My kids are in their late 30s. I urge the one that has the regular job with the 401k, make sure you're putting in at least 10% of your paycheck. Your employer's matching 4%, combined 14%. That's pretty good. Live within your means. Um, some millennials are going to inherit a lot of money from their baby boomer parents. Others are not going to get a dime. It is not homogeneous. That is really unfortunate. I see spending priorities changing. By the time I was 30, my husband and I owned a home. I see many 30 somethings that can't even think about buying a home between the incredible high average prices, the high interest rates now, and what comes out of their paycheck in terms of when I was starting to work, I basically paid my rent. Didn't worry about things like health insurance. That became a big issue later. Now they've got rent, they've got cell phone bills, they've got health insurance they've got to pay for, they've got auto insurance, they might have a student loan debt. If they're lucky, they've got a retirement plan at work, get the money in, pre-tax before you get your hot little hands on it. I think forced savings is a great way to save, but it is very hard. And I tell them Social Security will be there for them. It may not look exactly as it does now. I don't have a crystal ball to say what exactly that benefit's going to look like, but I am firmly convinced it is the bedrock of our patchwork retirement system, and it will still be there.
So my view, I agree 100% with what you just said and everything you've said. We're really on the same page. It would be good if we could differ on something, but we really haven't. We've tried this for 35 or so years, and we've never been able to disagree, as far as I can tell. But one thing that people should try and think about is working. Just retirement should not uh, come into anybody's mind if they're physically able to keep working. And the majority of people that are retiring are physically able to keep at it. I'm 73. I'm still working full time at Boston University. I think I'm the top publisher in the department this year. I'm trying to
Congratulations.
egg my colleagues on and say that proclaim this so that push them to work even harder, and they work hard, but that you can do more. Everybody can do more, and
I think you're right. I think people who are physically able to continue working doesn't have to be where they spent their career. They could be, working at their local golf course, signing people
right.
in, just things to have that social engagement, to have a little bit of money, because money that you have coming in from a job is money you're not taking out of your savings. I think some sort of work in retirement is terrific. And also, it's one of the reasons I encourage people to wait until at least they reach their full retirement age to claim Social Security, because at that point, you can make as much money as you want without forfeiting any Social Security benefits. What so many people don't understand is when they claim their Social Security benefits early, before their full retirement age, not only are those benefits permanently reduced by claiming them early, but if you make too much money, which is about $22,000 a year this year, you are going to forfeit some of your Social Security benefits if you claim before full retirement age. So another great reason to keep working and delay claiming Social Security if you can, because then your benefit is going to be worth more.
Yeah, well, let me jump in on this. This is a huge pet peeve of mine, because Social Security
We'll see you
has
soon.
this feature, this provision called the adjustment of the reduction factor, which says that if you lose a particular benefit, like let's say you're taking your retirement benefit at 62 and it's reduced by a quarter, whatever, 28%, whatever it is, there's that. But then if you go back and earn beyond, as you said, 22,000, you're going to lose 50 cents on the dollar in benefits. So you think, oh my gosh, well, I'm going to pay a 50% marginal tax here. I'm going to lose, maybe 20 cents on the dollar with Social Security, on the income tax, the federal income tax. Then there's my state income tax in 42 states. And then once I earn this money, if I go and buy something, I have to pay a sales tax before I get the actual commodity. So this is just, astronomical marginal taxation. I'm not going to go back to work, but the truth is that, and this is something Social Security doesn't tell people, it hides this fact that if you lose money to the earnings test, that's actually a good thing, because for almost everybody, because once you reach full retirement age, there's this adjustment of the reduction factor. They're going to raise your benefit in light of all the benefits you lost to the earnings test. And then because the increase is beyond actuarially fair, you'll get back about $1.20 for every dollar you lose in present expected value and actuarial value. So it's actually a good thing.
The way I explained it is, let's say your full retirement age is 67, but you go ahead and claim 5 years early at 62, the earliest Social Security claiming age. So instead of getting 100% of your benefit that you would at 67, you would get 70%. You've taken a 30% cut right off the top. And let's say you keep working part-time or whatever, and you make more than that $22,000 a year, you're going to lose $1 in benefits for every $2 over the limit. But once you reach the full retirement age, they're going to review your record and say, hey, Mr. Johnson, I see you claim benefits at 62 and you got a 30% haircut, but I also see over the last 5 years, you've given back about 24 months of benefits because you made too much money. That's 2 years worth of benefits. So now we're going to recalculate your benefit at your full retirement age. So instead of paying you as if you claimed at 62, we're really going to pay you as if you claimed at 64. We're adding those 2 years back in. So going forward, you're going to get a bigger monthly benefit. It's one of the reasons I tell people, if you plan to keep working, just don't claim early. It's an accounting nightmare. We know about benefits being withheld. You're going to get a bill in the mail a couple years later. Hey, we overpaid you by $30,000. We want it back in a lump sum. It's a mess. If you're going to keep working, which is a great idea, just don't claim early. And once you get to your full retirement age, if you want to claim, go ahead, because the earnings reductions go away. But if you can afford to delay, in some cases, people up to age 70, my full retirement age is 66. I wait till 70. I'm getting an extra 32% compared to my full retirement age every month for the rest of my life. And the most dramatic comparison I can offer people is the difference between claiming as soon as possible at age 62 versus as late as possible at age 70. That monthly income increases by 76% for the rest of your life. As a certified financial planner, there is no investment I can recommend to you that is guaranteed to increase by 76%, basically over an investment of 8 years
Yeah.
of your life.
And just to be clear, because I always like to dot the i's on these things, cross the t's. If I'm getting, let's say, a retirement benefit and I lose it, a lot of it due to the earnings test. I'm 62. I didn't take your advice. I took the benefit, and then I got called back to work. And now I do go back to work. I lose maybe all my benefits due to the earnings test. Now, but that retirement benefit that I was taking is going to be increased. But now, if my spouse had died, let's say, and was a much higher earner, and I can now switch on. I decided to switch on to my widow's benefit at full retirement age, having had that benefit, having my retirement benefit increased is nice, but it's not going to help me because I'm now going to be taking my widow's benefit or widower benefit that's higher. So actually, in that case, the earnings test is this massive tax on working. So we have, in general, since Social Security is not telling people about it, this adjustment of the reduction factor, what it's doing is it's trying to induce tens of millions of Americans not to go back to work who are coming into retirement and then looking around and realizing that they haven't saved enough. And then they think about going back to work and they're being told they're going to be taxed at this confiscatory rate. And now they're basically going to be relatively impoverished the rest of their days. And Governor O'Malley, if you're listening to this show, please tell everybody about the adjustment of the reduction factor so we get people to go back to work. Most people are going to, for most people, this does not constitute a tax because for most people, they're not going to be switching on to a higher benefit. So let me bring this to a conclusion since it's been about an hour and we've, I think, had a really good conversation about Social Security situation and your career and what it takes to have a successful career and the need for younger people to actually save and the need for older people to work and be aware of the fact that working doesn't come with such a huge penalty for most people as being advertised by our own Social Security system. I mean, this is a social insecurity system as far as I am concerned, even though I love its purpose. I would love to redesign it over, I actually have a book called You're Hired, which says exactly how I would fix it and how other economists would fix it. It would be much more like the Provident Fund in Singapore, where money is invested collectively. Wall Street doesn't get anything out of this whatsoever, doesn't participate, and it's invested in a global index by my laptop. And we actually then would have a fully funded system and wouldn't have this ongoing rip off of each generation rips off the next. Anyway, we've had a good conversation. Is there anything that you'd like to, really good conversation, and I really appreciate your coming on. Anything you want to add that we haven't talked about?
Well, again, I talked about in some cases for people who are healthy enough and wealthy enough to delay up until age 70, there is this huge payoff. And I don't think everybody should do it, but I think particularly in married couples, if one spouse, preferably the one who has the bigger benefit, who is often the husband, who's often a few years older, if he can hang out till 70 to get that biggest benefit possible, it's also likely going to translate in the largest survivor benefit possible because he is likely to die first. And having said that, the wife in this case, even though Social Security benefits are gender neutral, let's say she's not working and she has a benefit of her own, she may want to go ahead and claim at 62, even though those retirement benefits are permanently reduced. It brings some money into the household, takes away a bit of the sting of having the husband wait till 70. And what so many people don't realize is even though her retirement benefits would be reduced the rest of her life because she claimed them early, it would have no impact on her survivor benefits if she is at least full retirement age when she's widowed, because retirement benefits, survivor benefits are two different pots of money. And she could be able to claim reduced retirement benefits first and still switch to maximum full survivor benefits later. So there are still ways for households, for married couples, and in some cases, eligible divorced spouses who have been married at least 10 years, divorced, currently single, to maximize their lifetime Social Security benefit when you think about spreading it over 2 lifetimes.
Right. So let me just put in a little commercial here for my company's software called maximizemysocialsecurity.com, maximizemysocialsecurity.com. For $39, you can explore all these options, and the program will automatically figure out what's going to give you the highest lifetime benefits. So the strategy that Mary Beth is referring to is a split filing strategy, and you could explore that and compare that with what the program says. The one concern I have with that is that the husband may not, the lower earning spouse, let's say the wife in this case, in your example, who takes her benefits at 62, may not, they may both live to their, to pretty old ages, and she may not benefit relative to having waited till 70 to collect a 76% higher number. So this is about as complicated a system as you could design. It's got 20,000 pages of rules, about 28 basic rules, about 12 benefits. So you really need expert software to help you on this. But anyway, let me thank you so much, Mary Beth. We're going to keep in touch for a long, long time to come, and have you back. And it's been a great pleasure. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Larry. I've really enjoyed our conversation.